too, I got it. Hi, this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this special edition of the Valley View, where we're interviewing various candidates for City Council here in Salem. And joining me for this show is Brad Swank, and welcome to the show, Brad.
Mr. Adams, how are you?
I'm doing fine. And I invited the candidates because we wanted to have more in-depth kind of conversation about various issues. So I'm glad you accepted.
I appreciate that. There are a lot of issues that
Yes, and one of the ones that I want to talk about first is the third bridge, because there's a lot of talk among the city supposedly thinks that a third bridge is needed. I'm not seeing the benefit for us local citizens, but I wanted to ask each of the candidates their opinion.
I'll tell you what I've been telling people at the door.
Okay.
And particularly in our ward, the third bridge is crazy. And I don't mean to make that blunt, but I keep being told that it's about solving some kind of traffic problem in West Salem because the current bridges seem to be busy. But the city's done a couple of studies that say that there are much less expensive ways of solving the problem of the traffic in West Salem during the rush hours than the billion-dollar bridge that they want to build. And I call it the billion-dollar bridge.
Because when you get down to it, that's really what it's going to cost.
It is really what it's going to cost.
Not the $400 million they're trying to peddle.
Well, the $400 million may put up the structure, but by the time you get done condemning property and building the peripherals and paying for the attorneys, and I probably shouldn't complain about attorneys getting paid, but by the time you get done doing that and paying for the cost of money over those, it'll be $1 billion. It's not really about traffic control. We could spend the money that they've used for planning already, almost $7 million. We could have changed some of the traffic things, retrofitted the existing bridges maybe entirely for seismic issues.
Which are going to have to be done anyway.
Which are absolutely necessary. And maybe for $15 million we could have added an extra lane on each one of them and done better channeling. The third bridge isn't really about traffic. It's about land speculation. The location, they've got it, and I've talked to a lot of developers who, when you get them in private, stop talking about the traffic issue, and they start saying, well, there's all that land north of West Salem that could stand to be developed, and if the third bridge were there, it would be much easier to develop. And
So they want a subsidy for developing this land.
Yeah, $1 billion.
Yeah.
And not that developing land is necessarily a bad idea, although I'm not for pushing the city out to the limits of the boundaries. But if they really wanted a bridge, we've got a landing for a ferry north of Salem where the city or the county or the state owns the land on both ends. You wouldn't have to condemn property. It'd feed into North Salem, and the bridge would probably be a lot less expensive. And maybe the counties would participate because it would be out of Salem. That's a different issue. But the third bridge, where it's located in an area that's challenged and for the cost, is crazy.
Well, not only that, but it seems to me then it would dump an awful lot of traffic into West Salem.
Yeah.
So I don't see where it would necessarily relieve the traffic problem that's currently going on in West Salem.
I'm with you 100%. And there are cheaper ways to solve those problems.
And I know that from my own experience, because I used to sub at various schools out in the Dallas area or Dayton area, so I'd be going through in the morning hours, and I never really had a problem. And also I'd be coming back during the supposed rush hours, and yeah, it'd be a little bit more crowded and like that, but I never saw it as being something that was that bad. And that might have had to do with the fact that I used to live in Sacramento, where they do have some rather severe traffic situations concerning bridges, and you could be stuck on their bridges for like 20, 30 minutes sometimes. Whereas here, I didn't see that. I was usually always moving. I very seldom had to stop. And
well,
so
if you put a traffic light at the end of the bridge before you can get into traffic, you're going to back up traffic on the bridge. It's just going to happen.
Right.
If you had adjusted your traffic flow so that even certain times of the day, those traffic lights wouldn't stop the traffic, but they would be redirected in one of the other directions that's available, I think you'd see that disappear. But the city knows that already.
Yeah, it's too bad the city doesn't think about those things as they go, because I've seen that at night when I used to work. I used to go into work at 9:30, and the traffic lights are still set up as if it was daytime. And I'd be sitting there forever, it would seem like, with no cars coming.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it was very frustrating. So your view of the third bridge is that it's basically crazy.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people at the doors, and particularly in Ward 2 where I'm running, I get a lot of people shaking heads going, okay, have you been on 17th Street? You think there's a traffic problem over the bridge? Look at 17th Street, look at 12th Street, look at any number of streets, Liberty and Commercial. The third bridge, there are traffic problems,
right.
So I'm not saying that, and there are things that need to be done to adjust them, but the third bridge doesn't really address any of them.
Right.
It's about a totally different issue.
That's not being discussed.
That's not being, well, not in the open.
Right, okay.
It's being discussed.
Now, the other infrastructure project that's being talked about is the Civic Center. Yes. And relocating the police department. And, you know, they're estimating the cost at $80 million. And you're going to have to, this is another case where you're going to have to retrofit the Civic Center anyway, because you've got the library, and you've got all the various city offices besides the police department that need to be protected as well.
Yeah, we need a new police station.
Okay.
We've got a police department that's in the basement of a building that's seismically challenged,
right.
That's in between two of the busiest streets in Salem. If we have a 5-point earthquake or a 6-point earthquake, the first responders
are crushed. Yes.
That's not going to be very helpful. And one of the reasons that it's so expensive is if you looked at the design of the new centers, they're going to put a bunch of underground parking in and refurbish some of the existing underground parking, but they're not going to increase the amount of parking space particularly. And, you know, Eugene finished a new police station last year where they went to an off-site location, not near their civic center, had plenty of ground level parking. They could have a couple of story building, and it cost them $16 million. I've been working with the people who worked on the county building where the buses come in, who talked the county out of tearing it down.
Right.
It was going to cost the county $33 million to tear it down and $55 million to build it, a new one. They were recognized when that building was opened 2 weeks ago as having saved the county maybe $60 million. They've been looking at the police station. They think there may be as many as half a dozen sites in Salem, off-site, where a police station could be put for $20 million. And the city might go for a $20 million bond as opposed to an $80 or an $85 million bond. And that would leave the money and room to retrofit the rest of City Hall and the library, which need it, and maybe there would be some spare money left over. We have elementary schools and junior highs all over Salem that have never been retrofitted for seismic conditions. And maybe the city, and that's an important issue too.
Yes.
And maybe the city could be participating in freeing some of that money in some way to do that. But $70 to $85 million just seems excessive to me, and almost everybody I talk to.
Yeah, but those are the big infrastructure. Now, are there any others that you are aware of that are coming up that we need to be aware of?
Those are the two biggest. I mean, there's a growing traffic problem. There's the north end of the old corrections building and hospital site off Center Street, in between Center and D Street, the North Park blocks, or
North Campus.
North Campus, that's it. That has been put on hold. And maybe for good reasons, because people are looking at that issue and trying to decide what, it's a big piece of property. The neighborhood has vested interests in things staying as parks. And one thing that I'm working on, I'm working with a group that's trying to protect Howard Hall from being torn down. Howard Hall is the hall that's on the corner of the hospital campus, and it's a historically designated building. And there is some movement, well, the hospital's filed to destroy that building and put up a playground there, and the playground isn't a very good location because there are no barriers between the proposed playground and the streets. Anyway, but and once the historic building comes down, they can do anything they want there.
Now, is the there need to be work on that historic building? Is it in good repair?
Well, I've talked to, the guys that I've been working with, Gene Pfeiffer and Jeff James, not the guy who runs the restaurant, but the architect in town, have taken a look at it and said it's totally restorable for some of the purposes that the hospital's already talked about. They've talked about having a residence where people who have children in the hospital or relatives in the hospital can stay. That building could be repurposed for that. They've come up with a couple of other things that it could be repurposed for, save the historic neighborhood, and prevent expansion of the hospital into that part of the neighborhood.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad to hear that is at least being considered, and I'm glad to see you're thinking about that issue. So one of the other issues that came up, and it kind of leads to how City Council does things, and that is downtown parking. And in my interpretation is that the City Council came up and decided that they needed to have parking meters. And when they met resistance from downtown business owners and so on, who then immediately started an initiative drive, they immediately kind of panicked because they were getting all these signatures and just implemented the initiative without any thought about the consequences of just having all-day parking when they weren't monitoring residents who park down there and employees. And so now you have a situation where even if I go down there, and I do sometimes, go down around 8:30 in the morning, most of those parking places are already filled.
Parking's an issue in every city. Yeah. There's no city that escapes the issue of parking. The downtown Salem parking situation is very complicated, and it's complicated by money and moneyed interests. And I'm glad you picked it. It's a perfect example of the city struggling to work on an issue that they should have done differently. The downtown Salem businesses pay a parking tax, and they started paying a parking tax a number of years ago because people in shopping malls pay property tax on the parking that they've got in their malls, and they thought it was unfair that the downtown parking people didn't pay, so they were going to put in meters. So they agreed to pay a tax so there wouldn't be meters and there'd be free parking. Well, the city, some time ago, decided that it wanted to put in meters for paid parking. Originally, they weren't going to get rid of the parking tax for the downtown parking for the local businesses downtown. But there's another issue that's sort of hiding behind a door on this, and that issue is the parking structures downtown. For years off and on, and I've heard it for 3 or 4 years, but I've heard it at least twice in the last year, the city's been considering selling the downtown parking structures to some private entity so they could make money off of them. And the city currently doesn't charge for parking in the downtown parking structures. But you can't make money off of a parking structure that's in a downtown unless there's paid parking on the streets. It's one of the things they've discovered in Portland. But the city's not, and the argument the city's making for collecting parking from parking meters, which don't pay for themselves, by the way, is that they can't raise the money to maintain the downtown parking structures. But they won't charge as little as $1 a day for parking in those parking structures, which would pay for the maintenance that they need. So you've got all of these interests. The city wants to sell the downtown parking structures at some point, and they're keeping very low key about that. They want to have on-street parking so the parking structures will pay. You've got major shopping malls downtown that essentially have free parking in the parking structures next to them now, are opposed to paying even $1 a day for people to park. And it's a discussion that needs to go with all of the downtown businesses. It needs to be open to the public. We need to address the downtown parking problem. I'm not sure what the problem is. I suspect something like having only 4 hours a day of free parking downtown. That would stop the employees. But I've heard from shop owners I know downtown that the enforcement people come into them and say that the city is not enforcing parking against your employees or against the people who live here, even though when the city passed, well, and how to say this, I was at a city council meeting when they doubled the minimum parking for the downtown tax. And that's an increase in the parking tax that affects mostly small businesses and some businesses that don't even have regular customers. It was brought up as part of another ordinance that was passing. There was no previous notice that it was going to be part of that ordinance that was being considered that night. There was no public testimony taken, none at all, none allowed. And it passed on a vote that simply said, one of the members of the council said, I'm voting for this item on the agenda. Are there any objections? No, it passed. And then about 3 minutes later, one of the councilors turned around and said, are we going to do that parking tax thing tonight? And one of the other councilors turned around and said, we passed that 5 minutes ago. That's an example of how complicated the situation is and of what the city is doing. The city's concerned about parking, and they should be concerned about parking. It's a difficult solution. But part of how they react shows that how insular the city council has become from people. And they didn't include a lot of downtown small businesses when they were talking about what to do. Downtown small businesses should be included in that discussion, and it should be open to the public, which I don't get the feeling was very clearly.
Well, no, and see, that was my interpretation, that they, like I say, they just kind of panicked when the signatures were gathered and all these people were signing on to it. It was interesting because I was approached at the Saturdays Farmers Market to sign the petition, and I said, no, I would not sign it. And in fact, what I would like to see is them put parking meters out there on Lancaster Mall and make them pay as well. I know that they pay like for their customers to have free parking, but I guess my attitude is that people need to be thinking about driving less, not more, because one of the situations we're facing is climate change. Yes. And the more people drive, the more problems you're going to have maintaining that lifestyle. And so we as a society, and the city council needs to be thinking about this, is where do we put our money? And it kind of ties in with the third bridge, is that like, we don't want to be building infrastructure that is going to be obsolete before its time. Because like on all these infrastructure products, you're talking about a 20 to 40 year lifetime. Yeah. And like, are you going to have that many people driving individual cars in 30 and 40 years?
This conversation
I know
goes so many ways from there. One of the issues is, I agree with you on, we don't need to build out, we need to build better for the city. We are one of the only cities of our size in Oregon and maybe in the United States that doesn't have weekend bus service. We don't have weekend bus service because all of the local governments share a common tax base, and it's property tax. And it's the city, and it's that pays for the parks, the police, the fire, it's the schools, which a number of schools have been laying off elementary school librarians. They've been cutting back on musing because that tax base is being put under pressure. And one of the things that suffered is Saturday and Sunday mass transit. And the city has ways of getting around that limit. For instance, I don't know if there's a thing that I like to call development incentives. They're urban renewal districts, or some of them economic improvement districts. And some of these things, when the city creates them, from the time they create it, any increase in property value in that development incentive area, or urban renewal area specifically, can't go to any of the other taxing districts. Doesn't go to schools, doesn't go to public transport. It can only be spent within that district, mostly for new construction that will assist business. And so you can't use it for administration, you can't use it for maintenance. And schools don't get a part of it. And we've got 7 urban renewal areas in Salem that are taking money in that way away from other taxing districts, one of them that's been in existence for over 30 years. We have an over-reliance on that kind of development incentive. It's like the $750,000 that was given, I would say, as a gift to the developer of, originally thought as a gift to the developer of the riverfront property at the end of March, and they had to re-give it to him in the last city council meeting because they wanted to do it in a different way that didn't cost as much money because they weren't borrowing it. But when they originally gave it, there was no discussion of it. Again, it was one of those things that I move agenda item B on the thing, and you had to look at the staff report and go to the 4th page and a footnote before you found out that there was $750,000 involved. I didn't know whether it was good or bad originally because nobody talked about it at the city council meeting. But it's $750,000 of taxpayer money that is not going to street improvements, that's not helping the schools, that's not helping the sidewalks, that's not opening the 2 fire stations that have been closed. It's an issue.
Yeah, and I live in District 1, and the sidewalks are in horrible repair. Sometimes when I was working, I'd get off, it'd still be dark. It was dangerous walking. I used to have to carry a flashlight because the sidewalks are in such bad repair.
Last week, I was canvassing, and I ran into this in my neighborhood, which is one of the downtown neighborhoods near Bush Park. I ran into this little old woman who was in her 90s. Had a great conversation. She was walking around her driveway that she had her son come replace. And she was doing it with her cane because she needed the exercise. And I said, well, she was 2 blocks from the park. Why don't you walk down to the park? And she said, I'm afraid I'll stumble on the sidewalks and hurt myself.
Yes, and I would agree with her. And I'm not 90 yet, but I don't want to be walking on these streets if they have sidewalks if they haven't been improved. And I live about 5 or 6 blocks from a small local neighborhood park that I love to walk down to, and I know most of the people along the way, but I will not do it in the dark anymore now that I'm retired.
Well, I bike regularly to the gym because it makes my doctor happy.
Yeah.
And I don't live that far. But
it makes you feel better, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
And I have to be careful of the streets that I travel on because I ride a bike. But I have recently encountered skateboarders. I don't know if you've noticed, but skateboarders
Oh, no, I do.
are a hugely increasing sort of wheeled pedestrian population. And they need something to be done for them. It's not just bicycles, it's pedestrians, it's skateboarders, it's any number of people who are traveling by methods other than cars who need to be considered. And the more we consider them, because people, not just people our age, but a lot of people, well, our son wants to live near downtown where they can walk and they don't have to live their life in a car.
Well, I'm just going to bring up a subject that really kind of gets my goat. And I live near the corner of 17th and Chemeketa. And the drivers that drive along 17th like to play chicken with pedestrians. And I've seen it during pouring rain. And this one really got me. There were 2 ladies with strollers, and people would not stop to let them cross. And that to me is part of the problem, is that you're in a car and it's raining and you won't stop for a pedestrian. You're not getting wet, but they are.
But it's like so many issues. I was at a thing on Monday with the Statesman Journal, and they were asking a question, almost the same question you're asking, but about bicyclists and things. And I was going, it's not so much a building issue where we need to build around it. It's training the police to enforce the laws to make everybody safe within the city, and that's less expensive than adding new lanes or those sorts of things, but it's very important to helping us build the inner part of the city.
Yeah, and see, the city did send the police out to do a crosswalk kind of thing, but that was after a visually impaired pedestrian got hit by a car in that intersection. Then they did something about it, but they haven't been back since. And the other part of that is that there is a law about using your cell phone to either text or using your cell phone in a car. The police do not enforce that. And I've seen it time after time where a policeman is beside somebody doing that or behind somebody doing that. And one time, the car in front of him almost hit a pedestrian in front of the Capitol because he was on his phone. The police didn't even pay attention to him and didn't even cite him. And that, to me, is what you're talking about. They're not enforcing the laws to make sure that pedestrians and bicyclists and skateboarders and others are safe.
Well, and to be perfect, policing is not an issue, or not an easy issue to deal with. It's not an easy job. I spent a great deal of my professional career dealing with police, and I dealt with one of the things I did when I was young and in a galaxy far away was I rewrote the 1983 revision of the Oregon Vehicle Code that took me 5 years, and it was before computers, so it was.
Oh, okay.
So I dealt a lot with police. It's a hard job.
Well, there's no denying that.
And part of the training needs to be to getting them focusing on the things that are important to the area that they're developing in. In some neighborhoods, it's important that they travel around and look for people breaking into houses. In the downtown area, transportation, traveling from one place to another is of increasing importance. And pedestrian traffic and skateboard traffic and bicycle traffic are all fitting into what will make downtown Salem more livable. I mean, I assume that we spend a lot of time walking places.
Yes. I love being able to walk downtown because then I don't have to worry about a parking
Yes.
place. And I used to walk a lot of times over the state capitol or the state library because I was doing some genealogy research and like, okay, I just walk over there.
Yes.
And like when I do have my car work done, I drop it off. Actually, it's across from the Capitol and walk home.
Yeah.
And you know, it's easy. In a lot of cases too, it's faster to bike someplace or sometimes even walk someplace than it is to take a car downtown.
Well, I'm sort of an interesting person to ask on this because I've lived in Salem since 1973, and I've lived in that whole time within a mile of the Gold Man on top of the Capitol. And that's so I could walk almost every place or bike almost every place I wanted to walk or bike. I mean, when I was going to law school, I could bike to the law school, and I was head resident at Lausanne, so I could bike to all the stores and all those. You know, I appreciate walking. I think for many reasons, it's the future of a vibrant downtown in Salem.
And that's what brought me to Salem. I moved here in 2007, mostly because it had a downtown. I could walk to a grocery store, I could walk downtown. There were lots of places I could walk or bike easily here in Salem. And I think that is something that's very attractive about Salem, and it's something that I think, you know, Salem should be proud of.
Well, and it would be enhanced if we had more money for things like public transit, because there are any number of people who would like to use it. If we had modifications to our ordinances for bicycles and pedestrians and skateboarders, if we had training for the police, and maybe a few more police officers, because if they're not riding around in cars, they're like me and they end up getting in better shape. So.
Yeah. One of the things that you brought up at the Salem City Club was about this off-shifting of taxes into utility fees. And so maybe you'd like to discuss that with the time we have left.
It's a huge issue, and it's one of the things that got me first into following Salem City Council, because I noticed it happening when I was working at the legislature. It's where you take something that's originally paid for out of a general tax that everybody pays, and you move it over to a fee-for-service kind of thing. And 13 months ago, when I first started watching, Salem was thinking of doing that with streetlight fees. You know, now paid for by a general tax, move it over to a utility bill. And it was postponed until after this election, but they've already done that with a rainwater runoff fee. Check your utility bill. You'll see that you pay a rainwater runoff fee, and you pay it the same. But businesses the city isn't going to even discuss having businesses pay that fee for another 2 years. And the Salem Statesman has already written an article on that. And this is a growing problem in cities. I looked at Medford. You can look at a lot of other cities. Medford's added to utility bills a fee for police, for firefighters, for parks, for rainwater runoff, for street repair, for sidewalk repair. It's a way of shifting taxes from a tax everybody pays to taxes that are mostly paid by homeowners, renters, and small businesses. I see that as an unfair tax shift and something somebody should be on city council to oppose. And I'm the only person running for any elective office in Salem that believes that's an unfair tax shift and has identified it. And if you don't have to believe me because I'm running for office.
Yeah.
You can go to the Chamber of Commerce. They have a voter's guide on their webpage. You can look. We were all asked that question specifically, and I'm the only one who spoke out against it.
Well, I'm glad you did, because that is something that, I mean, taxes are a big issue. Yes. And I noticed at the Salem City Club, when people were asked with the pop quiz about who believes in increasing revenue, nobody rose their hand, which politically is kind of, a problem. But I mean, Salem has been kind of in decline a lot because the revenues aren't matching what they need done.
Absolutely.
And you can sit there and talk about making cuts or spending your money more wisely, but basically it comes down to a lack of revenue.
Revenue's a real issue. I don't see the solution to shifting that to homeowners and renters and small business people. The legislature Salem City Council and the Salem needs to go to the legislature and work with the legislature on modifying some of the tax issues, because that's really the only thing that can be done. Measures 5 and 50 are the ones that are putting the clamp on the property tax and forcing local governments to look for other sources. And the legislature's really the only one that can do that. And Salem is not lobbying them for that purpose.
Well, Brad, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show, and thanks a lot.
Thank
for
you.
spending your time with us. And come back next time. We'll have another special edition of the Valley View with City Council candidates.